That person who used to chain his own coffee mug so no one could steal it. That person who looked average in school, but later saved millions of lives. Yes, Alan Turing. That man who saw AI coming decades before everyone else. Think about it. If you saw him walking past you on the street, you probably wouldn't look twice. No dramatic presence. No larger-than-life aura. Just a quiet guy, slightly awkward, lost in his own thoughts. But here's the crazy part. Inside his mind, he was already living in a future the rest of the world couldn't even imagine yet. He wasn't just solving problems, he was asking questions no one else even knew existed yet. Like, can a machine think? And back then, that sounded insane. Machines were just machines. Cold, lifeless, predictable. But Alan, he didn't see machines the way everyone else did. He saw potential, possibility, something almost human. And that single idea? It didn't just change science. It quietly shaped the world you're living in right now. Every search you make, every recommendation you get, every AI tool you use, it all traces back to a question one ordinary man dared to ask. So yeah, the chained coffee mug guy, he wasn't just weird, he was early. And being early is a dangerous thing. If you think this was just about war or code breaking, you're missing the bigger picture. Because what Alan predicted next, that's where things start to get uncomfortable. Back then, families didn't always stay together. And for Alan Turing, that wasn't just a phase. It was a fracture. Think about it. His parents weren't around, not because they didn't care, but because they were far away, working in Madras. And Alan, he stayed behind in England, a child, separated not by choice, but by distance. Imagine being that young and trying to understand why your parents are just gone. Not forever, just far enough that it feels like forever. You write letters, you wait, you imagine their voices, but they're not there. So he grew up in someone else's house, a foster home, different rules, different people, nothing familiar. And here's the part that sticks. Even when you're surrounded by people, you can still feel completely alone. That kind of loneliness does something to you. It doesn't just hurt. It reshapes how you connect with the world. Alan stopped expecting people to understand him, stopped trying to explain himself, stopped reaching out. Because every time you reach and nothing reaches back, you learn. So he adapted, quietly, internally. He started spending more time alone, not because he wanted to, but because it felt easier, safer. And slowly, something shifted. He began turning towards something that didn't leave, didn't disappear, didn't create distance. Numbers. Think about it. Numbers don't ignore you, they don't misunderstand you, they don't make you feel like you don't belong, they follow rules, they make sense. For a child trying to make sense of absence, that's everything. So while other kids were playing outside, Alan was inside, writing, thinking, solving, not to become a genius, but to feel stable. And here's the crazy part. What started as an escape became a foundation. Because when you spend enough time in your own mind, you start building something inside it. Patterns, systems, ideas. Alan wasn't just learning math. He was building a way to understand the world without needing people to explain it. And that changes you deeply. Because now, you don't just think differently, you live differently. That quiet, isolated child, he wasn't just dealing with loneliness, he was preparing without even knowing it. Because the same mind that learned to find comfort in patterns would one day try to recreate that logic inside machines. But before any of that, before the ideas, the theories, the breakthroughs, he was just a kid, trying to understand why the people he loved weren't there. School was never the place where Alan Turing felt understood, not even close. Think about it. You're a kid who sees the world differently. You process things differently. You care about ideas other people don't even notice, and then someone throws you into a system built for sameness. Of course it doesn't go well. Alan wasn't a bad student. That's the funny part. He was actually brilliant, but only in the things he cared about. Languages? Not interested. Classics? Couldn't care less. Subjects he found meaningless? His mind just refused to cooperate. And schools hate that. Even now. Back then, even worse. Teachers didn't see a future genius. They saw a problem. A student who wasn't following the expected path. Someone too distracted, too different, too difficult to categorize. So naturally, he struggled. Not because he lacked intelligence, but because the system had no idea what to do with a mind like his. Can you believe this? One of the greatest thinkers in modern history looked, on paper, like a disappointment. Bad grades in subjects he hated, frustration, misunderstanding, distance from classmates. It was the same pattern all over again. And then, something changed. Alan met someone, Christopher Morcom. For probably the first time in his life, Alan met another person who could actually meet him where he was. Intellectually, emotionally, mentally. Christopher wasn't just a friend. He was connection, real connection. Think about how rare that must have felt, after all that loneliness, to finally meet someone who understands the way your mind works, who speaks your language, who makes you feel less alone inside your own head. That changes everything. Suddenly, ideas became conversations, not just private thoughts, not just notebooks and silent observations, actual connection. Christopher helped shape Alan in ways most people never talk about, not through grand speeches, not through dramatic moments, just through presence, understanding, shared curiosity. And sometimes, that's enough to alter the direction of an entire life. For Alan, this friendship mattered deeply. Probably more than most people around him realized. Because when you spend your life feeling different, the first person who truly understands you becomes unforgettable. Christopher didn't just become Alan's closest friend. He became part of Alan's emotional architecture. Part of the reason he kept going, kept thinking, kept exploring. And maybe that sounds dramatic, but it's true. Some people enter your life for a short time and permanently change its trajectory. For Alan, Christopher was one of those people. And just when life finally gave him something stable, something meaningful, something human, it was about to take it away. By the time the world was falling apart, Alan Turing had already spent years learning how to think differently. And now, that difference suddenly mattered. A lot. It was the middle of World War II. Europe was burning, fear was everywhere. And behind all that chaos, Germany had a weapon most people never even saw. Not bombs, not guns, information. Every military command, every submarine route, every tactical decision, encrypted, locked away inside coded messages. And those messages were protected by something terrifyingly advanced for its time. The Enigma machine. A machine so complex, most believed it was impossible to crack. Think about that. A war wasn't just being fought on land anymore. It was being fought through patterns, logic, signals, math. And hidden away at Bletchley Park, a strange collection of mathematicians, linguists, engineers, and analysts were brought together for one purpose: break the impossible. And right there in the middle of it, Alan, still awkward, still unconventional, still unlike everyone else in the room. But here's the crazy part. The exact traits that made him seem difficult in normal life were suddenly his greatest strength. His obsession with patterns, his refusal to think conventionally, his ability to focus for absurd lengths of time, it all became useful, essential even. While others saw random chaos, Alan saw structure. He believed that if humans created a code, then humans also left behind weaknesses, patterns, habits, predictability. And if you could find those patterns, you could break the system. So Alan helped design something extraordinary. Not just a machine, a thinking process built into machinery, something designed to rapidly test possibilities, again and again, relentlessly. This machine would later become known as the bomb, and no, it didn't magically win the war. History is never that simple, but it changed everything. Because cracking Enigma meant access, information, movement, prediction, knowledge before action. Suddenly, Allied forces weren't blind anymore. They could anticipate, prepare, respond. Think about how insane that is. Millions of lives, potentially influenced by one person's ability to think differently. Not through brute force, not through violence, but through logic. Alan wasn't on the battlefield. He wasn't carrying a weapon. He was carrying ideas. And somehow, those ideas became just as powerful. Day after day, message after message, code after code. The machine kept working, and so did he. Long hours, pressure, secrecy, no public recognition, no applause, just responsibility, massive responsibility. Because failure here wasn't theoretical. Failure meant lives, ships, cities, countries. And yet somehow, the same lonely kid who once found comfort in patterns was now using patterns to help change the course of history. Can you believe this? The boy who once struggled to fit into classrooms was now helping solve one of the biggest problems on Earth. But even after all of this, after helping save countless lives, after doing work most people couldn't even comprehend, the world still wasn't finished with Alan. Not even close. After the war ended, you'd think Alan Turing's life would finally get easier, right? A national hero, a respected genius, a man celebrated for helping shorten one of the deadliest wars in history. That would make sense. But Alan Turing's story was never built on what makes sense. Instead of fame, he went back to what he had always done best: thinking, questioning, pushing further than everyone else. Most people around him were focused on rebuilding a broken world. Cities needed reconstruction, families needed healing, countries needed stability. But Alan, his attention was already somewhere else, far beyond the immediate present, far beyond war, far beyond his own time. He had started asking a question that sounded almost ridiculous in the 1950s, a question most people probably would have laughed at. Can a machine think? Not calculate. Machines already did that. Not follow instructions. That was expected, but actually think, reason, respond, imitate intelligence. Today, that question feels normal, almost boring, because your life is already surrounded by machines doing exactly that. Your phone predicts what you'll type. Algorithms decide what you watch. AI writes, generates images, answers questions, and influences decisions. It's everywhere. So it's easy to forget how absurd this idea sounded back then. Alan was asking this in 1950, before personal computers, before the internet, before smartphones, before modern software even existed. Computers at the time weren't sleek or personal. They were giant room-sized machines, heavy, mechanical, cold, expensive, intimidating. Most people saw them as glorified calculators, nothing more. But Alan saw something else, potential, not just for faster calculation, but for imitation of thought itself. That idea became one of his most famous contributions, the Turing test. And the concept was beautifully simple. If a human has a conversation with both another human and a machine, and can't reliably tell which is which, then maybe that machine is demonstrating something close enough to intelligence. Simple question, massive implications. Because Alan wasn't really asking about machines, not entirely. He was asking something deeper, something philosophical. What actually makes intelligence real? What makes consciousness different from simulation? What makes a human mind human? And, weirdly enough, we're still arguing about those questions today. Every chatbot, every virtual assistant, every recommendation engine, every AI image model, every automated system quietly shaping your behavior exists inside the shadow of Alan's question. He didn't just imagine computers becoming useful, he imagined them becoming interactive, conversational, integrated into human life in some strange way. Alan predicted your relationship with technology before technology was ready for you. But while his ideas were moving toward the future, His personal life was moving toward disaster. In 1952, everything changed. Alan was prosecuted by the British government, not because he had betrayed secrets, not because he had harmed anyone, not because he had committed violence, but because he was gay. That was enough. At the time, homosexuality was criminalized in Britain, and suddenly, a man who had helped protect his country during wartime was being treated as a threat by that same country. He was forced into an impossible choice: prison or hormone treatment designed to suppress his sexuality, chemical castration. He chose the treatment, and what followed was brutal. His body changed, his hormones were altered, his physical health declined, his autonomy was stripped away, and psychologically, the damage ran even deeper. Humiliation, isolation, surveillance, public shame, loss of dignity. And then came another cruel blow. His security clearance was removed, meaning the government no longer considered him trustworthy. Think about how absurd that is. A man once trusted with helping crack enemy communications during war was now considered a liability. Not because his mind changed, not because his loyalty changed, but because society could not tolerate who he was. That contradiction is almost unbearable. The man asking what makes intelligence human was being denied basic humanity himself. And maybe that's the most painful irony in Alan Turing's story. Not that he was ahead of his time, but that the very society benefiting from his brilliance still found a way to punish him. He helped shape the future, but his own present had no room for him. And that is where Alan Turing's story becomes more than history. It becomes a warning, because sometimes the world is quickest to reject the people it later depends on most.